My name is Scott Silberry, and this is my wife Leah, and we're with Marriage Matters. And we enjoy doing this Monday, Wednesday, Fridays at 6:30 a.m. Central Standard Time.
Yes.
And we thank you for joining us, or if you catch us at a later rebroadcast, we thank you. So let us know you're here.
Yep. Good morning. Good morning.
Today we're going to talk about 6 questions about sex. And let's be a little more specific. Sex in marriage.
In marriage, yes.
Not just sex in general.
Well, like sex is one of those hot topic buttons.
Is it?
I think so. No pun intended. But, and physical intimacy is, I think, a hot topic in marriage because you either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
It's not one of those things you kind of have. You either have it and you're flourishing in it. You're doing a good job of cultivating physical intimacy and just intimacy in general, or you're not. You know.
And should I give my general confession?
Okay.
Like about establishing intimacy.
All right.
It's not just getting busy.
Right.
It starts long before that.
That's true.
With what they call non-sexual intimate touching, and I gotta confess, I feel like it's incumbent. Like up until a couple of years ago, I never even knew that thing existed. I didn't even know there was a term. The first time I heard it, I'm like, who's trying to trick me?
Right.
Non-intimate sexual touching.
Right. Which goes to show you can show an old dog new tricks.
You can teach an old dog new tricks. You're right. And so it kind of freaked me out. I got to be honest.
Right. But now you know, and you're
it's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Well, like if she's feeling amorous, and I just like I've been pumping it up at the gym. Like I'm so pumped up.
Right.
And like I don't want to be amorous back. I'm like, hey, how about a little non-intimate sexual touch?
He does say that.
No. I'm saying non-intimate sexual touching, non-sexual intimate. You see, I was testing you.
Right.
You let me go on.
Right.
Talking about non-sexual.
How sometimes I like to let you just talk.
No, you didn't catch on. You didn't catch on.
But he does say that. He'll be looking good after the gym, and he'll be like, no, let's just cuddle. And
let's
have
just
some,
cuddle. Non-sexual intimate touching.
Yeah.
Thank you for not clarifying that for me. I appreciate it.
Sorry. It's early.
So,
all right. So men and women, they're pretty much different about everything.
Yeah.
I think that we've established that through our many weeks of the show. And so why shouldn't it be any different about sex? God created us that way. He created us male and female, very different, different body parts, different thought process, different needs, different sex drives.
Different.
Just
Everything's different.
So I think the key to anything, though, is just understanding what your spouse needs. Your spouse could have and that's where, you kind of get into the, listening to what the world says and listening to what, like the averages, tune into your spouse and see what their needs are. And this is where communication is really open. So
and intimacy. I mean, and intimacy comes from open communication, but it also opens the door for communication. If you don't feel like you're close to your spouse outside of the bed or outside the act of love making, then there's going to be no communication.
Right.
And really, then intimacy has got to be suffering at that point.
But, and if you understand your spouse's needs in the bedroom and you do cultivate that sexual intimacy, you're going to have a healthy and happy marriage because sex is essential to marriage. We talk about the covenant that marriage is, but sex is the seal of that covenant. That's what binds you together.
Okay,
so we're going to talk about 6 questions that are often asked,
but not before. Very cool. And we're going to answer these 6 questions. We're going to power through these things. Hey, Jody, good morning. Hey, Myas, good morning.
Hey, Myas.
But the first thing is to be very clear.
Right.
Is God created sex.
Yes. That's true. It's
God
true.
created sex. Now, I know we act like the devil invented it because we treat it like the devil.
Right.
And the devil uses it as a very powerful tool against us. But God created sex.
Right. Yeah.
So let's jump into these. The very first question, what does the Bible say about sex?
Well, believe it or not,
Yeah?
the Bible has a lot to say about sex.
Really?
The Bible's a very sexy book. but it does have a lot to say about sex. And First Corinthians, and I love First Corinthians because here's this dude Paul who is single, never been married, but God has given him a word to, and he gives some of the greatest marriage advice in the book of First Corinthians. But 1 Corinthians 6:15 through 17 says, "Don't you realize that your bodies are actually part of Christ? Should a man take his body, which is part of Christ, and join it to a prostitute? Never. And don't you realize that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one with her? For the scripture says, the two are united as one, but the person who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him." And that's some heavy talk right there.
No, you're right.
Hey, Susan. That's a serious subject because that's when you start talking about soul ties, and when we've talked about soul ties several times through that. But marriage is a sacred covenant, and sex is the seal of that covenant.
Right.
And sex is meant to be shared with your spouse.
And only with your spouse.
And only with your spouse. The reason marriage and sex go hand in hand is because there's nothing more intimate than joining flesh with another person, with your spouse. And it creates a physical bond, but it also creates an emotional bond. So when you do it outside of marriage with multiple partners, you're hardening yourself to the possibility of that physical bonding. And then sex becomes the hunt for pleasure instead of the desire to love and please your spouse.
Yeah. And, in there, when he talks about, a man can, you cannot join yourself to a prostitute. And, it not just goes for the physical act of sexual affair, but it also goes for pornography. Mm-hmm. It goes for illegitimate fantasy. I mean, anything that takes your heart, your mind, your vision, yourself, your spirit away from your spouse is the same as joining yourself with a prostitute. It says, can a man take hot coals into his lap and his clothes not be burned?
Right.
Well, with his clothes, so it is. It's just, when we talk about intimacy, it's meant to be one-on-one.
Right.
And we'll I know there's a section we'll talk about, introducing pornography or other fantasy to spice things up. It doesn't work.
And you touched on it before, but God loves sex. He created sex, and we like you said, we treat it like the devil created it, because the world has perverted sex so much that's how we see it. It's that word to be whispered. But God wants you to have a fun and pleasurable sex life. Right. He wants you to have a creative sex life. He would not have given us male and female sexual organs that have pleasure if he didn't want us to have pleasure. He could have just made it to where, okay, y'all go procreate and get it done. But no, I mean, he gave us the ability to receive pleasure. So, but he also wants it to be monogamous.
And humans are what? The only animals that
mate face to face. I know you like that part.
I love that part. Look, when the first time I heard it, I'm sitting there going, I don't know, man. We're the only ones. Yeah, we're the only ones that mate face to face, because we're able to look into each other's eyes, and that's the intimacy. That's the windows to the soul.
Right.
And I'm sitting there going through my mind like, yeah. I mean, I've watched a lot of National Geographic.
Right.
And you're like, yeah.
Which is interesting, I guess.
No, I think it's very interesting.
Realize that you watched a lot of mating animals.
Oh, I thought the fact that we're the only species that mate face to face.
Too. But it's like you were talking about when you fantasize. It's like, who do you think about? An ex, someone on Facebook, Playboy, pornography, thoughts like that. When our thoughts are X-rated, we're cheating our spouse out of the full experience of being totally in tune with them.
Yeah.
And so it's really important whether you're physical and mental monogamy.
Right.
Is really important with your spouse.
Hey, good morning, Charmaine.
Hey, Charmaine. Good morning.
Okay, so the next thing, how often should we have sex?
Are you asking me personally?
No. Let's stick to the script.
All right.
Oh, my gosh.
How often should we have sex? Well, the data, I know you love the data parts. The data says the national average for married couples is around 7 times per month.
That's a lot.
That's a little less than twice per week.
Oh my God! Oh, that's all?
Yeah.
Oh, you said a month.
A month.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not a week.
Oh, I thought you said
7
a day.
times a week. So that's a little less than twice per month.
Yeah.
That's the national average.
And that's the national, right. Mm-hmm. Not that you have to go by the national average.
Right.
That's just the national average.
We like overachievers on Marriage Matters. Be an overachiever.
I know, man. Nothing like an overachiever when it comes to this.
But we get it. We're busy, we're tired, we've got kids, we've got work. Job is stressful.
There's a million reasons why not to do it.
Right. No, it's.
I mean, there's a million reasons. There's one reason to do it, because it is the seal of the covenant, of the marriage covenant, and it's like you like to call it, it's the sexy glue the sexy glue that keeps the marriage together, and it's not just about being sexy. I don't know, whatever. But it is the marriage seal. It seals the marriage covenant, and it goes back to Genesis, and where second chapter where it's the two shall become one. Well, that was part of that two becoming one.
Right.
Is that act of having sex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's sex it's vital to a healthy marriage. But if spontaneity doesn't work, if you find yourself tired, at the end of every day, and your 7 times a week turns into, or 7 times a week, I'm stuck on that now. So your 7 times a month, so your 7 times a month turns into 1 time a month, or 1 time every 6 months, or that's a conversation you need to have with your spouse.
So what do you do?
Because
What do you do?
Somebody's needs aren't being met.
There you go. So how do you make sure that they're met?
A conversation.
That's it.
And schedule the time. If you are one of those busy people who are overwhelmed with kids and everything else, schedule the time for sex. I know it sounds unromantic, but
you're right.
It's a necessity. Sex is a necessity in marriage.
No, the first time we were reading about it, we heard about it, it's like, schedule it? Schedule sex? And we talk about it. We'll work all day. We'll spend 8 to 12 hours attending to other people,
right?
Be it in their profession or whatever the need is, we'll do that. We'll schedule it. We share a calendar as most everybody else does, but you will not schedule time in for yourself, and sex is part of that,
right?
So you're exactly right.
Sometimes I'll open the calendar and look up, and Scott's got sex scheduled.
Yeah, man.
Every other day.
I like that recurring calendar appointment. And then she deletes
and he's sending me reminders. But
seriously, it is that important.
It is, yeah. If you've got to schedule it, do it. And Paul says again in 1 Corinthians 7, 3-5, the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does.
Yeah.
Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive each other. I love this verse.
I know you do.
Mm-hmm. Do not deprive each other. And look, and
do not deprive.
And me, I don't mind stepping on some feminist toes. But the issue, and this is for women, look, 70% of the time, your husband, the man, is going to be more sexual than the wife. That's just the way that our bodies are made. And 30% of the time, women are more sexual, but it's the rarity. Your husband is more sexual than you are. Just like you have a need for communication more than he does. You both have needs that are different, but you should be serving each other. Period. End of story. Please your husbands. That's what it comes down to. That's what.
Now, it doesn't, and that does. It sounds, if you don't look at it in a biblical way or a scriptural way, when it says please your husbands, as if you're like a subservient slave or you're just a sex tool. That's not the case. That's where intimacy and understanding and communication comes in, and it's understanding that your husband does. There's men have 4 needs in marriage, and sex is one of them. They need respect and honor. That's number 1, the communication language that we speak. And if we don't feel like we're being respected and honored from our spouse, then we're not going to communicate. And then if we don't communicate, then everything else fails. So that's the number 1 thing. And then sex is the other. The number 2 and the 4. But that is it's important. So, it does. You said the anti-feminist slant to it, but it is not in a subservient way. We talk about submission and submission in love and honor, but in pleasing, when you don't feel like it, I just don't feel like it. The kids are driving me crazy. That's an act of submission. That is an act of sacrifice.
Right.
That what? It's easy to. I just don't feel like it.
Right.
But.
Well, and what are you telling your husband? I've given my kids and my work everything I had all day long. But at the end of the day, when it comes to you,
Right.
I'm not gonna
Right.
dig in deep in the well and find something left for you.
Right.
You know,
You're
and
right.
and that becomes a pattern. And but Paul says in 1 Corinthians, do not deprive each other. And here's a big one too with women: don't use sex as a weapon,
Right.
and don't use it as a reward.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
No, it's true. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because you teach and train anybody anything, and
Right.
so you're right. When you start using sex as in the way that it's not meant, in a self-sacrificing and showing sacrificial love, then it takes on a whole different connotation than what it was meant to do as the seal of the marriage covenant.
Right. No, you're right. And
Let's say hey to Melinda and John
Oh.
Martin.
Hey, how are y'all? I guess they're not updating on this thing, huh? But rarely are a man and woman's sex need or sex drives going to be in tune with each other. I mean, if you think about it, rarely do you feel like having sex at the same time, you know. And we kind of touched on that on another different show, but
Right.
you know, about what can you do for each other to kind of, we talk about men like romancing a woman all day long.
Right,
You know,
right,
whether it's text messages, whether it's your favorite non-sexual touches and things like that, you know.
Or whether it's saying, hey, I'm going to get some ice cream. I'll be back later.
Right.
I mean, I think that
That's very
brings
sexy
a lot,
talk
brings a
for
lot
you.
of a lot of intimacy.
Right.
Okay, so we're talking about ice cream and intimacy and sexy talk. Question number 3: is there anything too taboo in the bedroom between a husband and wife?
Ooh, all right. So this is a big one too, huh? Anything too taboo. And I think, you know, when it comes down to it, God created sex to be amazing between a husband and a wife. He wants you to explore, be creative, have fun, laugh, and enjoy. And we talked about he didn't have to make it pleasurable. And we're going to reiterate: God created sex, not the devil, because that's how we treat it.
And you know that we like to joke about the missionary position, you know,
Right.
And not while we're doing the missionary position, but
No
if we do,
joking,
it's
yeah.
okay. but you know, that's where I think the church really misses the boat, because you know they don't talk about sex in church, and when they do talk about it, it's like a big deal, you know, and it's almost like the pastor's got to be like, hey, remember when y'all were kids? And like I remember like when Blossom came on,
Oh, yeah.
or Arnold, and they would say on a very special episode of Blossom. Well, I knew that meant as a kid we were going to bed early,
Right.
because something
Parents
was about
only.
to happen.
That's
Parents
right.
only. Well, that's the same way in most of the churches, that they you know, it's like she jokes about her mom, you know, still when she says, you know, she says the word sex, she whispers the word sex. It's like the devil created it.
Right.
So, you know, the church, if that's where your standard is set, is you know, your understanding of sex or appreciation of sex as the covenant seal of marriage. If all you've ever heard in church is the whisper of the word sex,
Right.
or not even the mention of the word sex, what are you left to think? That there's restrictions and it's taboo and it's not fun, and it's like, well, why would I get married and ruin the sex?
Right.
Why not stay single and have all the fun I want?
Yeah. And, you know, we've said this several times, you know, the devil will do everything he can to get you in bed before marriage, and everything that he can to keep you out of bed after you're married.
That is, think about it. That is so important, you know. But going back to the topic of taboo is, you know, what do you think? What are you left thinking? Well, there's only one. You know, it's a very rigid way of procreating,
Right.
And it's in the missionary position. Well, who thought of that stuff?
Right.
Some missionary, I guess, right? So is, you know, the what is the benchmark for
Right.
determining whether or not it's appropriate?
Right. No, you're right. And that is the question. If you're just joining us, we had a couple people join us. Is there anything too taboo in the bedroom between a husband and wife? And and the answer to that is, as long as you're both comfortable with what's happening in the bedroom, then enjoy and go for it. The Bible does not have parameters on sex.
No.
They don't say, all it says is to be monogamous.
Yeah.
And
Hey, May, how
you
are
know,
you doing?
So we'll get questions about like masturbation and sex toys and oral sex and all of these things. And the thing about masturbation is, we know it keeps us from giving our whole selves to our spouse, especially if we've already satisfied our own needs.
Right.
But there's nothing to say that you can't do it during the act of sex, as long as you're pleasing each other.
Right.
And I think that's what it comes down to,
And
is
the
that
key
you're
is-
pleasing each other.
Well, and the benchmarks are, is it consensual
Right.
amongst both husband and wife? Have you both agreed on it? Does it bring pleasure to both? And is it honoring the marriage covenant?
Right.
And
And
if-
and the Bible says that, in 1 Corinthians 10:23, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. And everything is permissible, but not everything is constructive. Nobody should seek his own good, but the good of others.
Yeah, and that's about it. Are they both? Is it both consensual? Is it pleasurable? So Annette says only thing taboo is bringing someone else in,
And that's why we say monogamy.
right.
That's
And
the only
that is
thing
the key.
the Bible says, is to be monogamous in your
I love the
marriage.
story with Abraham and Sarah, and there's so many different levels of that, But God had promised them that they were going to have a son, and they got older and they got older, and it's a lesson about not you don't have to help God come through with things, right? Well, as things went,
That's true.
they got older, and Sarah was not able to give him a son. So she thought she was going to help him out, and she gave Abraham her maidservant, Hagar. And they had a child, Ishmael. Abraham and Hagar did. Ishmael. Well, guess what happens? Then, of course, God's going to deliver on his promise in his time.
Right.
And Sarah gave him a son. Well, now you got this situation, right? Where you've got the woman that you brought into the bed because you were going to help things along.
Right.
And this created a child.
Right.
And now you've had the promise of God be delivered upon. And it created, as you can imagine, a really funky situation.
Always a bad idea.
It's always a bad idea. So Annette, the point is, you're right. It's never a good idea. Right. If you feel like you got to spice things up, the quickest way to spice things up is to start openly communicating your needs to your spouse. The only reason to bring somebody else in is because you don't feel. The only reason you may feel it's okay to bring some is that one of y'all's needs are not being met.
Right.
We're going to bring it to the next level.
Right.
It's just going to be one time. Well, you know what? It was just one time for Abraham. But you know what? That created a lifelong soul tie. That created a lifelong legacy with not just Isaac, who was Abraham and Sarah's promised son, but now you've got Ishmael.
Right.
And the two conflicted, and the nations still conflict.
Right.
So you're right. It is never ever a good idea to bring someone else into the marriage bed.
Well, it's going against God's plan for marriage.
Right.
Don't do it.
And look, bringing someone in could be a real person. It could be pornography. Look, we get that question. It's like, well, we both consent. We both watch it together.
And we're going to touch on that later, because
Okay.
the Bible does have something to say about
No, you're
about
right.
that.
All right, number 4.
Number 4, I don't
Can I
feel
read
like
it?
I'm going to read it. You
Oh
have to
man,
take
I've
this
been
one.
reading all the questions.
I know, but I'm going to.
You got all the answers.
It says, I don't feel like we connect during sex. What are we doing wrong?
Well, you got to get closer. You got to move closer in the bed.
Right.
You can't connect if one's in the bathroom and the other's
This is a
in the
good
bed.
point. Very true.
That's why you let me read the questions and you give the answers.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just telling you.
He can't read this early in the morning because his eyes are blurry.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
So the first thing is secrets.
Right.
Secrecy. And listen, we've talked about it all the time. What is a woman's need in communication is security.
Right.
And if you're over there late at night and you're on your iPhone or you're deleting text messages as soon as they come in your reply, that causes suspicion because there's secrecy. And then if you're keeping secrets, which cause suspicion, it destroys a woman's need for security. There's no security when you're wondering what he's over there, who he's text messaging, and why he's deleting stuff so quick. It ain't like you got an old school minute plan where you're going to eat up your data usage and you got to
Right.
delete your text messages. Something's going on.
Right.
So secrets, bam, big time killer for intimacy.
And I think the kind of theme of this show has been trust.
Oh,
and
yeah.
if you have secrets, you're putting distance between you right off the bat, and you can't have total intimacy without total trust. So trust and intimacy go hand in hand. It's really important.
Yeah.
And the second thing is inadequacy, and that's a big deal, especially with women. Do you have insecurities about your looks, your weight, your body, your stamina, your performance? Especially if you've had a lot of other sexual partners, your spouse might feel insecure as how they stack up in the lineup.
Right.
You know.
Oh man, that's a good point.
And this is something women deal with more than men, just because they do have that, you know. But you know, it's so funny because like women can stand in front of the mirror and they'll see every flaw in their body, and men will stand in front of the mirror. It doesn't matter what they look like, and man, they're
like, yeah.
a stud. Yeah, it's a totally different.
You know, I had a friend of mine told me several years ago that his dad was in his 70s, and his dad told him, he said, you know what, in my mind, I'm still 28, and I think we do that. I think mostly, particularly men.
Right.
I think we shut it down at a certain age, and we were always that age.
Right.
You know, and when he said it, I was like, wow, that's amazing. You know, because it goes back to what you just said. You know, you could be 50, 60, 70, 80, but in your mind, you see that 18 or 28-year-old kid, that stud.
Right.
And you're right. And I think women, like you said, I think they do. They beat themselves up for every flaw. But it's not because it's what they want to do. I think it's like you said, you know, if someone's had more sexual partners throughout the course, then of course you're going to wonder, and that's where suspicion comes in, and that lack of security. So be it guys, ladies, it doesn't matter. It's incumbent upon you. It goes back to communication. Communicate to your spouse, you know, and I mean, be complimentary, be present,
right?
Actively engage in the act of creating intimacy. So intimacy will lead to sexual fulfillment.
Right. And you know, we've talked about this before. It's like your spouse is the only person that you get to see naked, and vice versa. Women, your husband is the only person that you're it. You know, so they see you in a very different light than how you see yourself.
No, you're right.
And
you know what? Don't assume. You know, don't assume that. You know, oh, she knows how I feel. Look, don't assume anything. Always, communication is so important.
You know, we heard a great speaker talking about if you think it about your spouse, if you think that they're looking good right then, or if you're thinking about sex, or if you're thinking about, you know, a date night, or if you were thinking something positive about your spouse, speak the words, send the text message. Don't just think it and then move on.
Right.
You know, because your spouse, don't assume that they know how you feel or what you're thinking.
Right. And you know that can lead to resentment. I want to say hello to Linda Rodriguez Kramer and Jennifer Wise. And Charmaine does. She hits it. She goes, society makes us self-conscious about body image. And you know, and that is, you know, so we're taking what society says we should, could, and would look like if we did this, that, and the other thing, you know, and we're taking all that societal baggage and we bring it into the bedroom.
Right.
And listen, it shouldn't matter what society says. And so, you know, husbands, you know, if you know that your wife is struggling with that,
right,
you know, you've got to open up and communicate and let her know how special she is, and that she's the only one. Because look, if you don't, we go right here to resentment.
Right.
You know, I mean, resentment, fights left unresolved, transgressions against each other. Maybe, you know, you've not forgiven them for something they've done, or you said you've forgiven them and you still lord it over them. Those things interfere with intimacy, which interferes with sexual fulfillment.
Yeah, you can't bring those issues into the bedroom,
right?
Because that's not sexy.
No.
You know, it's, to be in that almost, like you like to say, that almost coitus stage, and then immediate thinking back. Well, he did this, you know, or she did this.
You know, and you talk about makeup sex, you know, and of course, you know, makeup sex comes when you make up. Right. You've forgiven, you've been forgiven, you've discussed, you've communicated, and then bam, let's get after it.
Yeah.
Because it's sexy sex.
You can't harbor resentment. That's not sexy sex.
Exhaustion. We kind of touched on that.
Exhaustion. We did. Schedule sex when you need to. You know, try to understand. This is where communication is key. When are you peak? You know, Scott's peak at 3:00 in the morning, and a very verbal.
#TMI.
And I'm not, like, I want to go to bed, but, you know, I understand that is your time, you know, and so I'm going to that's also your time for communication and intimacy and to share things that are on your heart, you know, so even if my head hits the pillow and I'm tired, I'm going to make myself engage with you because I know that my window of opportunity is small with that, You know, you're not going to
TMI.
You're not. Well, I'm talking about like, you know, you sharing your heart and things like that.
Right.
You know, you're not going to do that in the middle of a work day. That's not how you roll.
Right.
But it's understanding when your spouse is most receptive, when they're most active, when they're. It's really just understanding your spouse.
Right. So, and you know, exhaustion is part of this. The next phase. It's called, and it's rejection.
Yeah.
You know, and that is so key. I mean, no one wants to be rejected. You know, we're talking about when
Especially
we talk
by
about
your spouse.
We talk about the language of men. You know, it's we need to be spoken to in a matter of honor and respect. And like Leah says, even if you don't deserve respect, if you give respect to your spouse, your husband, it'll blow their mind. You know, almost like, you trying to trick me?
Right.
What's going on here? You know, but being rejected, man, I mean that is a big blow to a man's respect, to their self-esteem. And rejecting your wife is a huge blow to their sense of security.
Yeah.
So rejection.
Because, man, if you want to see those insecurities come up that we talked about, the inadequacies,
right,
reject your wife, you know.
Let me say this. I mean, God put it on my heart as we were just talking. You know, when it comes down to feelings of inadequacy and all these, is if, you know, again, if you're remarried, you know, so we talk about other sexual partners in the past, but if you're remarried, it's tough, number one, to remarry successfully. You know, like we said, the first marriage is in 50% of the time. Second marriage is in 63% of the time. Third time marriage ends 74% of the time. And there's a lot of dynamics that go into it. It is super difficult to do it without God as the head. But, you know, talk about comparison and inadequacy and things like that. You know, when your spouse has been married for a long time, or they've been married for a short time and they divorced, you know, what are you always thinking? You know, well, I wonder if I'm as good as the ex, or I wonder if I'm better, or I wonder if this and that, and it you know, it's a game that's being played that you know, it's just a whisper that Satan puts in your mind that is absolutely there to destroy the intimacy, because you get into the whole comparison, and you know, we talk about communication, you know, and it is so important, you know. I mean, I don't know, you know, you don't tell your spouse, hey, while you're having coitus, you know, when you're in that non-missionary position, I'm not thinking about my ex, you know.
Right.
It's not the time to talk about that, you know. But, you know, you can say things throughout the day that starts to hint to your spouse that, you know, like, you know, hey, I'm so-and-so, follow them on Facebook. Look, there's really no reason to follow your ex on Facebook other than stalking and just, you know, and it brings those feelings of fantasy back. And, you know, like we said before, Satan's going to whisper in your ear, you know, they really weren't that bad. Y'all had great sex together. And then when you and your spouse are suffering, maybe because of exhaustion or you've had a fight or unresolved transgressions, excuse me, I mean, that's where Satan steps in. Excuse me. To start really whispering that in your ear. It's like, you know, y'all hadn't had sex in about a couple weeks.
Right.
Boy, you and your ex, y'all used to get after it all the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is nothing but Satan whispering in your ear. Wow. So be aware of that. You know,
Facebook is such a, I guess like I wanted to say, melting pot's not the right word, but it's just a place for that, where stuff like that grows, you know. I mean, you see it all
like
the time.
Like a petri dish.
Yeah, that's what I meant. A petri dish, like, you know, the word Facebook is mentioned 70% of the time in divorces nowadays.
I know, that's crazy.
And
it's crazy, but it's not. I completely see that.
The truth of the matter, like, if you've had a sexual relationship with someone or an inappropriate relationship outside of your marriage, there's no reason to have any communication on Facebook. You shouldn't be friends with them. There should be no contact. Right. Because it is so easy for Satan to slip that back in there and remind you of what you had or what thought you would have or things like that. But, you know, we're still on number 5. We're talking about rejection of your spouse. And, you know, I mean, if you're the spouse that keeps trying to works up the courage to initiate, you know, sex over and over again, and you're constantly rejected over and over and over again, it's devastating to the spirit, and you're killing. There's the word trust again. You're killing the trust that you've already built. Because
what happens then the spouse being rejected, right? And like sometimes you said, works up the courage. Sometimes it does in a marriage situation where things are not intimate and they're not being openly communicated. So you're starting to worry about, well, how come they've not initiated sex, or what's changing, what's going on, who are they, who else are they thinking about, and it does. A pattern of rejection can develop itself. So that's where that open communication comes. And look, again, our ministry is remarriage, and again, we joke about like first time marriage, you first time people.
Right.
And again, God bless you if you've never divorced, because it's, it is a horrible thing to live through, but God restores and can reclaim that second chance love. But you got to add all those elements into when you're coming into when you're talking about sex and marriage, as important as it is. And then, Facebook and people at work and all the temptations on the outside. And but when you've been remarried, you've got that ex right in your face all the time, especially if there's kids involved.
Right.
Because then there's constant communication. And that can cause some really insecurity on the part of your spouse.
Right.
So.
Right. And that's where that no secrets thing comes in again,
And that leads us to the next big question. We had the 6 about sex, and it's how do you overcome past sexual experiences or regrets?
Right. And the truth of it is that we all bring baggage on some level. Some people have like a little, tiny makeup case worth of baggage, and some people got,
you fit a little chihuahua in.
Right. And some people got 15 trunks.
Like Tom Hanks and Joe versus the volcano.
So everybody has different levels of baggage that you're bringing into your marriage.
Yeah.
But
and oh my gosh, we talk about SYMBIS, and it's by Dr. Leslie Parrott. It's saving your marriage before it starts, and it is a pre-marriage and a new marriage assessment survey, and we have it on our website, marriagematters.me, and the questions they ask are questions that couples need to be asking. Listen, I guarantee you, if you took this assessment before you married or right after you married, it would reduce the number of divorces exponentially, because it asks these questions. It gets into things about finances and family relationships, and it gets into things such as sex. Yeah. And there's things that we don't reveal to our spouse or our fiance or whatever. And it's not just about, I'm feeling sexy or I'm feeling this. You get into some real issues like sexual abuse. And is your spouse going to feel like they can open that up to you? Right. And a lot of times they don't, and they won't. Right. And then you get into a marriage sexual situation, and then there's some dysfunction. And then, if your partner doesn't know that, then that's going to create a whole other set of circumstances, which just exacerbates the prior. You're re-victimizing the victim without even realizing that you're doing it. We call it scar scraping. You're reopening old wounds, and maybe you didn't even realize that those wounds were there in the first place.
Right. No, but like you said, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's multiple past relationships, sexual relationships, healing has to happen before you can have true intimacy in marriage. And this includes if you're in a marriage with infidelity, where infidelity has occurred. And the thing is, no matter what your circumstance or your past circumstance that you brought into your marriage or that has occurred during your marriage, you can have a beautiful marriage. You can have a God-centered, beautiful, miraculous marriage. But because God does work miracles. Yeah. And we've seen God work miracles in our marriage. There's no reason why we should be married except for God. Right.
And Susan says, she said, amen, thank you for saying God restores. And God does restore. He can take the most. Look, when we started looking at our past, and not just us, but going back through our family, you start talking about generational curses, and when we started looking, we even had to go to DNA.com or whatever, Ancestry.com. Right. Because we wanted to know, where our family's past? What generational curses do we need to pray over before we can break them, restore, and move forward with our family's legacy? And and Leah found, divorce after divorce after divorce after divorce throughout your family. Right. And in my family, there was divorce and there was addiction throughout. And when you start understanding that, and you start realizing that there's a lot of baggage that, like you said, that gets brought to the table. And it's not just intuitively assuming it, it's openly discussing it. And it is. And so, in a case where, like you said, where there's infidelity, for men, I've written a couple articles about why do men cheat. And it's not because of raging hormones. There's an issue there. Mm-hmm. There's a core issue that needs to be resolved. And if you can't open up and you can't discuss this with your spouse, then that issue's never going to be resolved. Mm-hmm. And so that is, but God can restore relationship.
Right. And if your spouse, if you are in that situation of infidelity, if your spouse is truly repentant, forgive him as God forgave all of us, and get counseling. That's a biggie. But you've got to begin the process of healing. And but your spouse, if you are the one who caused the infidelity, your spouse has to be your priority at that point. You've got to make them feel secure, loved, and that they can trust you. And that's vital to building back intimacy in a marriage. Yeah. And it can be achieved if you've gone through stuff like that. So don't feel like there's like a hopelessness. And I want to read what Charmaine says. She says, when we come to God, our spirit man is born again, but the mind must be renewed. And that's true. You talk about that, about programming the mind, about renewing the mind.
Right.
And, but yeah, like she said there, never underestimate God's ability to make things new.
Right.
Because
one of the things
we've seen it, we're witnesses to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. With infidelity, where there's an affair, it is crushing to the spirit. It is crushing to the marriage. Mm-hmm. And you know what that is? People, well, that's an easy out. Well, you can leave that person. You can this and that. You can. Or you can stick to the marriage covenant and you can work together to resolve. And it is. God can restore. God will restore if you have a repentant heart and you change your behavior. Mm-hmm. And but man, we know a lot of people that we communicate with, and there's been an affair, there's been that breach of trust. Mm-hmm. And one party or the other is not willing to truly be repentant. It's almost like, well, I'm just going to hang out, we're just going to pretend it didn't happen. Listen, that's not restoration.
Right.
That's foolishness.
Yeah, let's forget about it and move on.
You do not forget about it, and you do not move on. Mm-hmm. It has got to be confronted, and you know what? It can open up avenues of transparency. Mm-hmm. Because that's one of the next steps is after that occurs, is rebuilding that trust, is entering into that phase of absolute transparency. And through that transparency comes the trust and the erasing of secrets and through that restoration. So, you know what? You can push the big red reset button if there's been an affair, and you can divorce and you can move on and you can this and that, or you can truly repent and you can go to God and you can start opening up your baggage and looking at the dirty laundry that probably neither one of you ever shared with each other. Mm-hmm. And you can start working to cleanse that, to launder that, and to air it amongst each other.
Right.
Not on Facebook, not with everybody else, but you're exactly right. There is healing and there's restoration and there's a blessing to move forward.
Yeah.
Even where there are past sexual regrets and sin.
Right. Look, and that's exactly when you said blessing. God is going to bless you, because He's going to bless marriage first of all because He created marriage.
Right.
But when you are in those pits of despair like that, and you work to keep the covenant intact, He's going to bless you even more.
Right.
Because All
right. Number 6.
Number 6. You want me to read this one?
I get to read the questions.
Oh, okay.
You saw what happened last time.
That's true.
You let me read. You read it, and I had to give the answer.
All right.
It was colossal. It was colossal disaster.
All
right. Number 6. Is pornography ever okay, even when we watch it together? Mm. And Matthew 5:28's got a pretty definitive answer.
Yeah. So this is a hot button topic here.
Well.
So because there's several schools of thought. Like you said, people are like, well, it's just spicing up our marriage. We both agree to it. We both consent to it. And so we can tell you right now, we're against it. We don't think that you should bring anything into your marriage that is not you and your spouse. And whether it's fantasy or whether it's reality. And like you said, Matthew 5:28 very much touches on that directly. It says, to look at a woman lustfully is to commit adultery with her in your heart. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter if she's right there in front of you in physical spirit or if she's on the TV or the computer screen.
Right.
Hey, Hallie, good morning. To look at a woman lustfully is to commit adultery within your heart. And fantasy and intimacy are two different things. Yeah, and sex is not just an act for pleasure with no emotional attachment. At least
Right.
not in marriage.
Right, not in
you know,
marriage.
a lot of people treat it that way as they're
Right.
hopping from partner to partner to partner. But in marriage, it's not supposed to be that way.
Right. No, you're
so-
right. And you know, we talked about a month ago. We had, you know, it's when you can openly communicate. Sometimes it's not comfortable, but it was very interesting. And you were telling me that, you know, when a woman watches pornography, they immediately start comparing themselves to the women on screen. You know, well, they're my boobs or my butt or my this or my that, and they start feeling this level of inadequacy. You know, when guys watch pornography, they see themselves as that guy. Like, oh yeah, that's me, you know? And number one, it's really a weird thing to subscribe to, but that's where that difference is.
Right.
In that, you know, men see themselves in that role where women start to
critical.
They become very critical. So there's nothing healthy, even if you're watching it together.
Right.
You know, your husband's there in this false sense of inflation, and your spouse is suffering there with this unfair comparison, and it doesn't spice anything up.
Right.
And look, and Matthew nails it. I mean, you know, whether they're standing there in person or whether they're via the video screen, it is you're lusting after someone. And listen, you know, again, I have a men's group with Brick Breakers, and a lot of the guys talk about pornography and pornography addiction, and they're like, I mean, you can't control your mind. You can't just make those thoughts jump out of your mind. And you can. You can. It's called neuroplasticity. And it, like Charmaine had said, you know, it's renewing, refreshing your mind. You can control the thoughts in your head. And you can reprogram, you can rewire your mind. And the example is, you know, we were not created to consume pornography.
Right.
Right? God did not design us to be that way. We're designed to pursue a mate.
Right.
One mate, because you go to Genesis 2nd and it says the two shall become one. He doesn't say everybody's going to get involved.
Yeah, go to the mixer. And
Go to the petri dish and make
Right.
it happen. It's the two shall become one. So you are programmed to pursue and connect in an intimate relationship with one other person. Now, so that's the way you were wired. But you start watching pornography and you start watching it, and that wiring starts. It's thoughts that fire together through the synaptic gaps. Thoughts that fire together, wire together. So if you start watching pornography, you are now reprogramming God's natural design, spiritual design for your mind process. Not just guys and women. You know, either can be addicted.
Right.
But you gradually reprogram your mind away from the natural spiritual intention that God created to be one pursuing the other. So yes, you can reprogram your thought process.
Absolutely.
But guess what? Through the restoration of Christ, what do? You can restore that pursuit, that one-on-one. And that goes back to those foundational laws of marriage with pursuit, priority, possession.
Right. It's just like the Bible says, you got to take your thoughts captive. You know,
Right.
But you know, here's some some statistics for you. Lust, fantasy, and porn addictions. I mean, they've taken a huge toll on society. 70% of men between the ages of 18 to 24 visit at least one porn site a month. 70%.
Yeah.
That's huge. So think how many wives are the victim of mental infidelity, mental adultery. And Proverbs 5:18 says, "Let your wife be a fountain of blessing to you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She's a loving deer, graceful doe. Let her breast satisfy you always. May you always be captivated by her love." And you know, she's it. Your husband is it. If it's the other way around, and the
Right.
wife is the addiction. But that's it. That's who God created marriage for, was for each other, to please each other, to have that intimacy, that sexual intimacy with each other.
Yeah.
And trust and communication are key for that healthy sexual relationship.
It's funny that, you know, you said it a little while ago that trust seems to be the overarching theme of this conversation. And though I thought it was going to be all about sex, but it goes hand in hand. I mean, without that trust, then there's going to be no intimacy, and there's going to be no sex as relate. And Hallie does. She says you can battle them back. You can battle those thoughts back. You can bring your mind into a right position to where, we talk, about with pursuing your spouse. And it, we say it before, it's like when people, well, I just fell out of love with my spouse. And the same thing can be like, well, she doesn't turn me on. She doesn't do it for me. I'm not attracted to her anymore. So I go somewhere else. And, that's the same thing. Like you said, that's like saying your car ran out of gas, so you sold it.
Right.
Or your car ran out of gas, so you stole the one sitting in the parking lot.
Right.
That's ridiculous. You refill that love tank, and it comes from different, it comes from different mechanisms. But the best way to refill your marriage tank, your love tank, your intimacy tank, your sex tank is through open communication, which builds intimacy and trust.
Right. And your spouse is not a mind reader. And I think women are really bad about this. They expect their husbands to know how to touch them, to know how to do these things that bring them pleasure. And when they don't, then you're dissatisfied or you're unhappy or whatever. But look, they're not going to know unless you tell them the things that you like.
Right.
And if you're the other spouse, listen to the things that they like and do those things, Don't just be like, nah, I'm going to do this. Thanks for the suggestion.
This works best for me.
But yeah. So.
Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous.
But it's true, right?
No, you're right. So, oh my gosh, love is a commitment. Feelings can be fickle. Commitments are choice. And look, we're going to finish it on that. That goes so deep. It goes so far. It encompasses so many different levels. And Charmaine is exactly right. We hear it all the time. I'm telling you, this has been such an emotional week that we've really, really, really been praying over this ministry and just, through social media. And then, we like to eat out. And so God's like, okay, this is where you can meet people. So I made it a practice. So I always ask the waitresses, it's like, hey, we're going to say grace. Can we pray for you? And it took a little courage at first because I'm waiting to get food dumped in my lap or whatever, get kicked out of the restaurant, and it's very quiet, it's very respectful. And like the other day, man, we had this waitress, and immediately my marriage, and you saw the release of her spirit, and she started talking about it, and it was so emotional to think she's carrying this pain around. She's at work, working at IHOP, and she's the burden.
Right.
It's not the placing of order, the carrying of her big stack of pancakes. It's that her marriage is falling apart.
Right.
But it is. It's that love is a commitment. Love, we talk. It is an emotion, but you can't base love on an emotion, on the emotion of love.
Right.
Love is a choice.
It's a choice.
Love is a choice. And so is a commitment, and they go hand in hand. So if there is that love and there is that choice, you've got to understand that sex is a big part of it.
Right.
And it's time to stop thinking of sex in the way that Satan presents it. It's not all champagne and dark chocolates and this and that. Sometimes it's just like you said, you got to schedule that rascal.
Right.
And you got to say, hey, it's 4:30. It's time to get it on.
Right.
Right?
That's right.
Because you say that all the time.
That's what I say.
It's time to get it on.
That's what I say.
I could just hear you saying it as I'm saying it.
Send a text message and...
No, you quit text messaging words. You started sending those emojis. Oh my gosh. If Bitmoji can create something that says it's time to get it on.
And they do.
No, man. We'll never have to ever communicate with each other again.
Oh my gosh.
But no, you're right. And I think the easiest way to talk about sex is in an open, friendly environment, even in this form, But they're doing a disservice, the churches are, because they don't talk about it. They don't explain it as the seal of the marriage covenant. They don't explain that there's actually more than just a missionary position, and that it's sex is bad and it should be hidden and for your kids. You want to be able to communicate with your kids. And if you're not comfortable in talking about it with you and your spouse, how in the world are you going to help your kids to understand the value of sex?
Right.
The necessity of not giving yourself to other people before your husband. That it is worth the wait. For guys, young guys, that it's not a rite of passage.
Right.
That it's not your God-given ability or authority to conquer every girl you can.
Right. No, right.
It's because we're failing as parents to, number one, talk to each other, to appreciate the value of sex, the intimacy of married sex, and then passing it, imparting that to our kids.
Well, and I think we often overlook our kids and their depth of understanding, because believe me, they can tell. They might not understand sex as they have it through a kid's eyes or whatever, but they understand intimacy, and they can tell when they're adults. They'll be able to look back and see if their parents had that intimacy, had that sexual affection for each other.
Yeah.
And so your kids are watching, and they notice those things. So
and sex, a good bedroom relationship, it extends outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
When you see people holding hands and cuddling and being close, and I'm not talking about PDA, but
right.
I mean just
flirting.
Just flirting.
Yeah.
That's an
16-year-old calls it
extension.
old people flirting.
Oh yeah, y'all stop old people flirting. But it is, when you have that healthy relationship, it extends beyond the bedroom.
Right.
It's not just you have an orgasm and you go to sleep.
Right.
Well, sometimes you do.
Sometimes you do.
but the benefits is that it extends beyond.
Right.
So, but anyway, it really is. This is so important, and sex is vital, and sex in a marriage. Let's be super clear.
Right.
Sex within the covenant of marriage is very important, and so we do. We encourage you to really explore that, and to understand, number one, that God created sex, and He created it like you said. It could have just been a very mechanical process for reproduction. I mean, why not, right? But He blessed us with that it's pleasurable, and that it's wonderful, and that it should be enjoyed as a covenant seal of marriage. We do thank you, and we pray for you, and like I said, we ask that you pray for our ministry, and that we're able to continue sharing these truths and God's word.
Yep.
So cool.
Y'all have a great morning.
Thank y'all.
Bye.